Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Then the scribe said to him, You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and besides him there is no other. And to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. This is much more important than all the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, You are not far from the kingdom of God. After that, no one dared to ask him any question. The word of the Lord. There is only one choice for Christians, and that is to vote for Democrats. There is only one choice for Christians, and that is to vote for Republicans. There is only one choice for Christians, and that is to vote for Mother Teresa. You'd be surprised what kind of calls and emails and texts a preacher gets this time of year. I'm serious. I have gotten long messages telling me what I need to do from the pulpit this Sunday if I'm going to be a good preacher of the gospel. There are, of course, particular issues that they support, and they say that if I don't agree with them, I am not being faithful to the scriptures. So I listen to their phone messages, I read their emails, and then delete. But I'm struck by how angry these people sound, how angry they are at anyone who has the audacity to have an opinion that is different than theirs, how willing they are to condemn their neighbors, who, the last time I checked, are still children of God. And in these messages, they don't seem to quote Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, but they do seem to quote CNN or Fox News. When the students in my economics courses ask me who I'm going to vote for, I quickly remind them the whole purpose of this course is to teach them the economic tools from which they can think for yourself. Telling them who to vote for is not my mission, only that they have considered and thought about the issues as accurately as they can. After doing that, they can make up their own minds about which candidate they like. It's up to them to use what they have learned to decide what it is they are looking for. Now, making decisions like this is nothing new. It's most likely the same methodology that was used back in Jesus' life. And our passage this morning picks up right after Jesus had been questioned by some Sadducees, and they were trying to make a decision about him. Sadducees had studied and closely adhered to Jewish law, so they were going to put Jesus to the test. These were serious times, and Sadducees were serious people. Sadducees were a Jewish sect that emerged around the year 175 BC. They were a group of men, no women were allowed, who dedicated themselves to keeping the Jewish law, all 613 laws. Their strict adherence to the laws, they believed, would preserve their religion and allow them to serve as examples for their fellow Jews. They were a legalist's legalist. They were still subject to all the faults and limitations that attempting to live that way may bring. Indeed, the Talmud describes 7 different types of Sadducees. 6 of those are bad. Now listen to these descriptions and see if any of these seem familiar even today. There were the shoulder Sadducees. They wore their good works on their shoulders. Their acts of purity and goodness were performed only if someone else could observe them. Waiting Sadducees always found a legal reason to postpone their good deeds. They talked a good game, but they didn't do much. The self-afflicting Sadducees would shut their eyes as they walked in order to prevent themselves from being drawn into temptation by looking at a woman. As a result, they would walk into walls or trip and fall and injure themselves. And their bruises were a symbol of their piety. There were the tumbling Sadducees. They walked with their heads bowed, so far bowed that they looked like a candy cane. Their humility also prevented them from picking up their feet as they walked, and so they stumbled over common obstacles. They wanted those who saw them stumbling around to realize just how religious they were. The compounding Sadducees kept a sort of scorecard with God. When they did something good, they figured now God was in their debt. To them, their religion was like one big profit and loss statement. The timid Sadducees were awaiting God's judgment. Living in fear of his wrath, they went to great lengths to appear to be good, at least on the outside. And the last group of Sadducees were the God-fearing Sadducees. They truly loved God and tried, as difficult as it was, to obey those laws of God. So which of these groups of Sadducees did Jesus encounter that day? We don't know, but most likely it would have been an assortment of all the different types, some good, some bad, but all bringing with them their own expectations, and all of them seeking something from Jesus. Some wanted to show they were clever enough to beat Jesus in a debate. Others wanted to prove Jesus to be a fraudulent prophet. Others thought Jesus could be the Messiah, but if that was the case, they wanted to find out, what was he waiting for? They had suffered enough through the occupations from the Syrians, from the Babylonians, from the Persians, and finally from the Romans. And oh, how the Sadducees hated the Romans. Sadducees wanted to take back control of their land, a land where all the people had the same religious beliefs as themselves. And so, as we are told, they met together and came up with what they believed would be the most challenging and most impossible questions for Jesus to answer. Then they sent their most talented trial attorney to conduct the battle of the intellects. Their question: which of all of those 613 laws was the most important? Perhaps as loaded a question as you can get. A group of individuals who have dedicated themselves to obeying all 613 rules now ask this fella, which one is at the top of the list? Surely, no matter what he answered, they would find fault and disagree with him. And the trial attorney, set to do their bidding, would tear his answer to shreds. But Jesus, as it seems he so often does, doesn't quite do what you expect him to do. He doesn't avoid the question by answering a different one. He doesn't use negative advertising to reveal the faults and weaknesses of the Sadducees. He doesn't pander to them by blaming everything on Rome. No, he answers them. And he answers them with such stunning clarity that they realize he's even more of a threat than they would have imagined before. His answer from the book of Deuteronomy: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. It's a perfect answer for the God-fearing type of Sadducees. For the other types, it's a direct yet subtle condemnation of their purported piety and efforts. For if they loved themselves more than they loved God, if they loved the attention they brought to themselves, if their expectation was that the Messiah would be a military leader, then they had to be greatly disappointed. Now it was they who were faced with a choice. Should they believe Jesus or not? Surely it would be easier to disregard his teaching. All their previous efforts of vanity would be for naught if they were to take him seriously. Then Jesus does the unexpected once again. He answers a question he wasn't even asked. He tells them what the second greatest commandment is. From Leviticus, he tells them, love your neighbor as yourself. Oh, how that must have stung those Sadducees. Because this was more than just an insinuation. This was pointed directly at those who indeed loved themselves and who loved the image that they projected in public. Jesus had seen into their hearts and showed them the staggering truth of just where they actually stood with God. And once again, the Sadducees had to make a choice. Accept Jesus' teaching or ignore his teaching. And following his teaching meant a change in lifestyle that they had become more than just accustomed to. Here they were being told that they were on the wrong side of the fence. What they needed to find was their way to the other side of the fence. And for some, that would tear them in half. They enjoyed being on the side of the fence they currently were on. There's a story about Michael Faraday, the 18th century English scientist, in his youth. He was going through town and he's trying to find a shortcut. And he saw there was a stone wall and there was a hole in it. And he decided to try to slip through that hole in the stone wall. And almost immediately, he became stuck. He looked at himself in his predicament and he noticed that his head had gotten through, but his shoulders had gotten stuck. So his head was on one side of the fence and his heart was on the other. And he wondered to himself, which side of the fence was he on? Love your neighbor as yourself. A selfless love that gives and expects nothing in return. Love that has no barriers, not racial, not economic class, not political. If we despise our neighbors, if we despise God's children, how can we love God? As we wrap up this political season, and as many would say, finally, over the last 2 years, it seems, as this presidential campaign has heated up, we've heard issues debated over and over. We've heard each party seek recognition for itself as if to say, hooray for our side, over and over. We've heard negative campaign ads over and over. The result of our exercise in democracy will result in a map with states that are colored in red or in blue, counties colored in red or in blue, cities and neighborhoods colored in red and in blue, and congregations colored in red and blue. And the process leaves us bruised and battered. It can cause divisions that are a threat to our own souls. How can we unify after such a contentious battle? And the answer is simple. Love your neighbor as yourself. The Sadducees had an expectation about who the Messiah would be. But Jesus rebuked their materialism and their nationalistic concept of the Messiah. But the Sadducees had hoped for a Messiah who would overthrow the Romans. What did Jesus do? He told them to love God first and then love your neighbor as yourself. This message was not what they or what we expect to hear in a highly charged political climate. But yet, that's what we've been told. First, love God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. How are you to love God? With all your heart. And how are you to love your neighbor? Even those who are red or those who are blue. Love them as yourself. In the name of the Father, and the Son,